Hello and welcome to part 2 of False Images. Your future is not cast in stone. In part 1, we reminded ourselves that we were created in God's own image and that He considered it good. Our images, our self-images, have been touched by sin to a point where we no longer recognize ourselves as the beautiful creation of God. And what we want to look at in part 2 are two ladies in particular, Rachel or Ruth. The name of this section is Choices. What's a girl to do? I said this because we can take the choices that Rachel made, or we can choose the choices that Ruth made. Let's look at the choices that each of them made. We're going to start by looking at Rachel's story in Genesis chapter 31. If you'll turn there and then turn to verse 19. That's Genesis 31 and verse 19. Before we read that particular verse, and while you're turning, I have the opportunity to tell you a story. I like to tell stories, especially stories about the Bible. Well, to give you a bit of background on Rachel and who she was and what was going on. Father Abraham, he had a son named Isaac with his wife Sarah. That's another story, a great one. You should read it. And then Isaac had twin sons, and they were Esau and Jacob. And Esau was the firstborn, but through manipulations, deceptions, and plans to change the fact that Esau should have gotten the birthright and the inheritance of the firstborn, Jacob, which means deceiver, took those birthrights and the things that should have gone to Esau, and because of that he ran away, because Esau told him, when our daddy dies, I'm going to get you. And he knew that Esau would, and so he ran away and went back to the land where his own mother Rebecca had come from. And he went to his mother's brother's house, Laban, and while he was there, he began to work for Laban. He began to know the family, and he fell in love with one of Laban's daughters, and her name was Rachel. And Rachel had a sister named Leah. Now, I need to tell you all this so that you'll kind of understand what happens in this verse that we're going to read, and why her story is important to what we're learning about, false images. You see, Rachel had been raised in an environment where deception was the norm. Jacob, unfortunately, had also chosen that to be his lifestyle. So he fell in love with Rachel and made a deal with his uncle Laban that he would work for 7 years with no pay in order to win over Rachel's hand. And he did that. For 7 years he worked hard, and the reward was to be his lovely wife, or his lovely Rachel would become his wife. When the end of the 7 years came, lo and behold, Laban tricked Jacob, just like Jacob had tricked Esau and his own father. And instead of giving him Rachel, gave him Leah. And so this was a terrible deception, and instead of even showing any remorse for it, Laban told him a story about how the younger daughter couldn't be married before the older daughter, and justified what he had done. And then he says that he will give him another chance to win Rachel, and he can work another 7 years. And Jacob agrees because he loves Rachel very much. So after another 7 years, he did indeed marry his Rachel that he had worked 14 years for. And then story after story, and you can read in the chapters prior to what we're reading in a few moments. But after many situations where they were always manipulating, tricking, trying to outwit each other, finally the day came when Jacob felt that the Lord wanted him to return back to his father, face his brother, and go back to the land of his own father, and to leave this land. And so he brought his wives, Rachel and Leah, to the field and said, come and, let me tell you. And he tells them, and he reminds them of all the things that he's done for their father, and all the ways that his uncle Laban has tricked him, manipulated him, and not treated them fairly. And he's wanting to win them over. He doesn't have to win them over. They are ready and willing to go. As a matter of fact, Rachel says, he has not been treated us fairly either. Now, these are my words. You can read the literal story. But she said, he has taken our inheritance and squandered it, and he has not given us anything. And, basically we're ready to go. And then, right after that, a pivotal point in the story happens, and it says that, I guess that Jacob was waiting for the right moment, and so Laban, they had where they lived, and Laban went about 15 miles one direction to do some sheep shearing. And then, at that very moment, while he was 15 miles one direction, Jacob got his family ready, his sons. Most people think that 11 of the 12 sons, which would later become the 12 tribes of Israel, had already been born. So he had a large family, had his 2 wives, and he's going to head the other direction towards home. And he's trying to widen that gap because he knows that Laban's not going to want to let him go. And so there's lots more to this story, but what it says in the scriptures is that when Rachel and when he spoke to Rachel and Leah, and it says in verse 19 that Laban went to shear his sheep, like I was saying, and Rachel went and stole her father's images. So then nobody knows about this except for Rachel herself. And so they leave and they head out. And so then the story gets very exciting because word gets to Laban and his sons. Jacob has stolen away your daughters and stolen away the sheep and the cattle and your grandchildren and left. And so he finishes what he's doing. He hurries back. He's able to overtake them because he's not got a big caravan of families and tents and stuff. And so he's right there where he's getting ready to confront Jacob. And he goes to sleep, and the Lord comes to him, an angel comes to him in the dream and says, don't you touch Jacob. That, you will be sorry. That's my boy. That's kind of how God was saying it. Because even though Jacob had really made some awful choices, he was still a son, a descendant of Abraham, and God holds true to his promises, and he had made a promise to Abraham. So they have this big confrontation, and Laban accuses him, and Jacob defends himself, and finally Laban says, well, if you wanted to leave, why did you steal my images? And Jacob gets all mad, and he said, I haven't stolen your images, and if you can look anywhere for them, and wherever you find them, whoever has them, then they shall not live. He didn't know that it was his beloved Rachel that had stolen her father's images. We'll see what happens next in part 3.